Hello, welcome. Welcome to Claire Finlayson's launch for Dispatches from Raised Planet. My name is Monica Miller, and I'm the Marketing and Promotions Coordinator for Caitlin Press. Caitlin Press is an independent Canadian publisher located on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia, Canada. We publish culturally significant books, including fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And Caitlin Press is also home to Dagger Editions, an imprint for the voices of queer women-identifying authors. Thank you all for joining us. We've got a bunch of people here, all excited to see Claire with her debut book. I'd like to acknowledge that Caitlin Press receives support from the Government of Canada and the British Columbia Arts Council as a small independent publisher. And right now, during COVID, that support is more important than ever. So thanks from us. And although virtual, this event does take place on the land of Indigenous peoples. We're actually joining you from all different locations. Caitlin Press is located on the Sunshine Coast in Half Moon Bay, and that's the traditional territories of the Squamish, Seashelt, Sliamon, and Clahoosie First Nations. And Claire and our host Michael also live on the Sunshine Coast in Gibsons, which is the traditional territories of the Coast Salish and Squamish First Nations. And I work remotely from Vancouver, which is the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. If you want to share where you're joining us from, I've heard that people are joining us from all over the world. Let us know in the chat, which is part of my next bit, which is housekeeping. So there is a chat that you can join us in, and I'll be there in a minute doing technical troubleshooting. I see a few people are having trouble. Sometimes refreshing the page can help, or just reloading the video. If you don't like the chat, if you just want to focus on Claire and Michael talking, you can hide it if you hover over top of it. There's a small arrow in the top corner. And if you're on a phone or a tablet, I believe you can swipe or tap on the icon. The Crowdcast also has a way for you to ask a question. We're going to have audience questions at the end. So there's a tab called Ask a Question. If you put your questions in there, we will get to those at the end. And you can also look at whatever other people have submitted for questions and upvote them. So say someone asks something and that's your burning question. You need to have Claire answer this. You can upvote it. And we'll get to that at the end of the launch. And most important of all, buy the book. So Dispatches from Raised Planet is available now. There's a button on the bottom of the Crowdcast screen that says buy the book. That takes you to Caitlin Press's website where you can buy it. We ship across Canada. But we also strongly encourage you to support your local independent bookseller. On the Sunshine Coast, Claire recommends Tailwind Books. And there are lots of independent booksellers across Canada, and they need your support now more than ever. So we strongly encourage you to shop there. It's also available at those big box stores. You know who they are. If you're having trouble, ask in the chat. I'm going to head over there in a moment and help people out. And so I'm going to read Claire's bio and Michael's bio, and then I will let them take it away. So after a 25-year career as a jewelry designer, running a business, and raising a family, Claire Finlayson now writes full-time. She has always been an essay writer and occasionally a journalist, but her passion is creative nonfiction. Dispatches from Raised Planet, 7 years in the making, is Claire's first book, written under the mentorship of Betty Keller. Claire serves as vice president on the board of directors of the Sunshine Coast Festival of Written Arts, which is Canada's longest-running literary event celebrating Canadian writers. Michael Mazur is presently a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Education at SFU, focusing his research on personalizing learning. Michael's worked as a K-12 and post-secondary educator for 30 years, and he won a Prime Minister's Award in 2007 for his role in co-founding Self-Designed Learning Community, an innovative online school in BC. Michael has written 2 books and numerous articles and essays on education and other issues too, reflecting his background as a journalist and scientist. He lives in Gibsons, not far from Claire and her brother Ray. So I will say, take it away, Claire and Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Monica. Thanks for that introduction, and welcome to our audience tonight from near and far. It's a delight to be here. I'm Michael Macer, and my partner here is Claire Finlayson. Claire does not live far away from me. She lives fairly close, in fact, and as does her brother. And I would say that I first met Claire perhaps about 7 or so years ago. And not long after that, met her brother, thanks to her introduction. And I actually ended up hiring Ray to work in my school self-design at the time as a math tutor. And it was just a really interesting and serendipitous meeting, I think, with Ray and sister Claire. And it's been a delight to retain a relationship with them off and on over the years. And then it wasn't that long ago when Claire tapped me and said, by the way, my book is coming out on Ray and my relationship with him. And I got a copy, an advance copy, and read it and said, I'm thrilled with this book. It has so many important things to say, not just about your relationship with Ray, but shed so much interesting light into the role of someone who's identified on the autistic spectrum. So Claire, in the spirit of celebrating your book, I want to encourage people at home to get your, top up on your wine and canapes, and join us in our conversation and think of contributing some questions and answers yourself to the audience. But it's wonderful to be here, and I'd say, by way of a first question, if I might tee that up for you, would you kindly share with us a little synopsis of your book, and perhaps I'd help identify what was the genesis for your wanting to write it. So welcome to you, Claire.
Thank you, Michael, for that. And I know you're really busy with your PhD studies, so I'm grateful that you're here with me tonight. It makes a strange situation much easier because all I have is a little tiny hole. And I know that my audience, my friends, my family, even people who have got up at 2 o'clock in the morning, their time, are through this little hole. So thanks to them, and thank you for making this much easier and more fun for me, Michael. And I also want to thank Caitlin Press. I am in debt to this mighty little tiny company, smallest publisher in the West, probably literally. But Vicky, Sarah, and Monica are true professionals, and they put me through a rigorous and proper process to produce a book that I'm really proud of. So thank you to Caitlin Press, and thanks also to our audience. I had a friend drop by today, and this is a organic chocolate, and she said, just put this where you can see it, Claire, and it will remind you, no, that the people on the other side of your screen are cheering for you. So, okay, so you asked me a question. You wanted to know the genesis of the book.
Well, first of all, a little synopsis as well.
Right.
Quick synopsis.
Quick synopsis, and quick is not my forte, but basically, Ray and I grew up in a family where the oldest 2 of 6 kids, and my whole life I grappled with the problem of a brother who was so smart but just couldn't seem to intuit the social things that came naturally to me, and I was always trying to help him, or so I thought. As I say in the book, that I was probably just torturing him because I had no idea that he had a different operating system than I do, and that I was asking him to actually be a version of me, which is the one thing Ray couldn't possibly do. So the book is our journey to understand each other, to try to understand each other better. And that happened when we began writing to one another. So that's my synopsis. That's as short as I can make it. And basically, I've been writing my whole life, and Ray's Planet was just another essay that I wrote. As I recall, it was an essay about his freediving. So freedivers hold their breath, they use no breathing apparatus, and they go deep down in water for a long time. So at his peak, Ray could go 100 feet down in the ocean, and he could stay there for over 5 minutes. So I just wrote an essay about that, and my group and my writing class found that story completely intriguing, and they asked me to write more. So I went back, and for my next week's writing class, I had more, and they asked more questions about Ray. And this went on semester after semester. And I remember the day that my mentor, Betty Keller, said, "Claire, this is a book, and it's a good one." And after that, there was no stopping me.
Mm-hmm. Well, in your book, we learn about Ray's free diving, and we learn a new vocabulary around some really interesting and important issues like what's neurotypical mean, what's neurodiverse mean,
Right.
what is Goonbalong, that comes off the very top. Can you just enlighten us for a moment? What is intended by Ray's
These
term,
words?
Goonbalong?
Yes. Half the people that write me are like, "How do I say this word?" And it's Ray's word. He made it up. He intended for it to be difficult. He said the game of social niceties and political correctness and chit chat, and this is a very hard game for him to play. So he wanted a word that was hard to say. And Ray says his word is his revenge. So it's Goonbalong. And eventually in the book, we have mercy on the reader, and we shorten it, and we just call it G. And of course, probably everybody now knows that a neurotypical, that's just a term for a non-autistic person.
Mm-hmm.
And autism is a different neurotype altogether. So some people talk about NTs or neurotypicals versus autistic people.
Mm-hmm. Well, your book is a remarkable testament to your relationship with Ray, your brother, and also it's a remarkable journey that starts from your recollections. We're transported in time back to when you were little kids running around in West Vancouver and the snowy prairies and the sandy beaches of Barbados. But one thing that is so germinal to this work that helps make it stand out is this very potent communication that you share with Ray. Now, most people, when they're in communication correspondence with someone, they don't necessarily save it all. I routinely go through my inbox and I hit delete, as we're all encouraged to do.
Yes, we
you
are.
had the wherewithal to save a lot of your correspondence with Ray going back for many years, and you share that throughout the book. And that,
yes.
So that just takes us right back to the edge of this action, this very potent correspondence you have with him. Can you share a little about why or how you determined that you were going to save that correspondence?
I can. So first of all, I don't trust my memory. I know too much about how it works. And especially when you're writing nonfiction, and when that fiction is memoir, everybody has a version of the truth. So when you go into the room where these memories live in your brain, it's not that you are looking at a static thing frozen in time. You can rearrange the furniture in that room. You can leave things there. You can take away things you don't like. So memory changes and shifts and slithers around in time. So I've always known, and it's the same with letters from the olden days when we wrote letters back and forth. I would never crumple them up and throw them away if they're important to me and they take me back to a moment in time. So, because I've always kept important correspondence, email to me is letters, and I don't throw those away unless they're just incidental nonsense. So long before Ray and I knew we were collaborating on a book, his emails felt very important to me. And of course, once I said, Ray, I think we're writing a book, I had this gold mine that I could refer to, and nobody
Mhm.
could change it. It was
Mhm.
it was set in stone, and so that was the sort of the scaffolding of our book together.
Okay. Well, while we're on the subject of writing, um, you illuminate a couple of aspects of Ray's character and what he shares with you. And I found it so poignant that he self-describes himself as writing man and thinking man and speaking man. Can you give us some clues as to just share with us what are those distinctions? Um, what do they reflect in Ray's character?
They reflect the fact that, and this is something that I was really late to discern, because Ray and I grew up together, and we currently, as you mentioned, we live 5 minutes apart from each other, and we talk. And often we'll butt heads, but it was when I started reading Ray's emails that I noticed this completely different being than the one who might be a little argumentative. He might say something that hurts my feelings in person. So it was a while ago when I realized that the writing man was the Ray I really wanted to know. This is the Ray that is speaking to me with intention, that is not terrified of making social mistakes, that the action on the Goonbalong fields is frozen mercifully in time so that he can think. And so I realized that that's the version of Ray that I really wanted to access, because that's the heart and soul of Ray.
Okay, um, that to me is such an important discernment that you made to help recognize that, and maybe we'll circle back to that in a couple of minutes. The importance of that for for relatives of people who may have
Mm-hmm.
a different designation or a different sensibility in the world, as Ray seems to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, I would say that your book is, and by the way, I would like to say this off the top, that I think you can expect some award nominations coming through for this, because I think it's a remarkable first book, and I have reason to believe it is your first book based on what you've told me. But you pulled a lot of threads together in
Mm-hmm.
synthesizing uh, this material into the narrative that guides the book. And I wonder what you learned along the way in writing that, because it's as one writer to another, I recognize that that's a real strength of this book, is your structuring and the clarity, and that synthesis. So I can share some insights into
Yeah.
that.
I had a lot of help with structure from my mentor, Betty Keller, and from my writing group. I've got to tell you, Michael, that I have learned in this process of writing this book more than I could possibly say, more than people would take the time for. I set up some of my books there. I don't know if you can see them. Those are some of my favorite books on neurodiversity, autism, Asperger's syndrome, as it used to be called. I've learned something from every one of those books. But you know what? I learned more from Ray, because I'm speaking to a person I love, and now he's speaking to me from his heart. So I also learned that I didn't have to be Wikipedia. I didn't have to be a psychologist. My editor, Betsy Warland, was sicked on me to try and take my enormous 144,000 word manuscript and put it within the allowable 80,000 words that I was allotted. And so a lot of my research was in the book. There was quite a lot of scholastic stuff. I didn't know how much to tell people about autism. It was all new to me. So I joyfully added it to my book. But Betsy just kept saying, Claire, just tell your story. You have a compelling story. Just tell your story. So all of that was put in a pile. Ray and I like to call it Ray's Planet Returns if I write another book. But another thing I learned was that I didn't know my own brother until we started writing to one another. And that's been a humbling thing because I thought I had pretty good intuition. So I want to read you a quote, something Ray told me, and I found it really important. He said, "You get closer to wisdom rather than paternalism when you try to understand that you can't understand what it's like for me." So that really rung in my ears. And so I have tried to do less curing, altering, improving, remaking my brother in my own image. And I want to say that I've become more tolerant and kind and curious. I have a long way to go. I also learned that my way is not the only way. And I have another short quote that I'd like you to read to you. Because of course I thought the closer Ray was to neurotypical, the less painful this world would be for him. And he says, "Why must normal people always see difference as a thing to be squished, not a resource to be harnessed? Who is to say what the correct balance is between focus and flexibility? I often get tunnel vision and can't let go of a problem until it is solved. But is that really dysfunctional? Sure, there are times when it's not the right thing, but there are other times when it's the only thing that will get the job done." So I remember that. My way is not the only way. That's a big lesson for me. So I try to give other people the benefit of the doubt when they have different ideas, thoughts, emotions than I do. And I make fewer assumptions than I used to because, after all, if there was so much to learn about my own brother, what is there to learn about everybody else that I don't know? So those are a few things I've learned.
You know, very important things. You know, as one who's been involved in education with special needs kids and their families for many years, I would say that, you know, the insights that you share are quite comparable to the insights shared by Temple Grandin many years ago. And bada bing, I think that's a cue to talk a little bit about Temple Grandin.
Yes.
And the poll that we've arranged for people. But when we have a look at the poll in just a moment, I hope that you are able to share some of the insights around how you solicited an endorsement from Temple Grandin, and a little bit of the story around that, because for me, that Temple Grandin is kind of like a Wayne Gretzky figure, and I read your book and really saw a lot of similarities in what you were illuminating as well. So.
Yes. So the idea of contacting Temple Grandin to ask for an endorsement was pure hubris on my part. The poll, if anybody in the audience wants to go to the poll, we're asking whether you have heard of Temple Grandin. People interested in autism generally have, but that's not everybody. So while you're accessing the poll, I would just like to explain that she is one of the most, if not the most, famous autistic person alive today. in 2010, Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people on the planet. She has a TED Talk called The World Needs All Kinds of Minds. And there was also a movie about her that made her more famous. Claire Danes plays Temple Grandin in the movie. And if you haven't seen Temple's lecture, her TED Talk, and if you haven't seen the movie, please do yourself a favor and watch those things. So I don't know when we'll get the results of the poll, Michael, but
I'm looking at them right now, and most of our audience, approximately 74%, are familiar with Temple Grandin and her work. So this anecdote that you're sharing is will resonate with them.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised that we have a high percentage of people who know about her because of the theme of my book. And she has been a champion of neurodiverse people. So Ray and I actually went together and saw her lecture at the Massey Theatre in Vancouver when she was here in Vancouver many years ago. And after I got my contract from Caitlin Press, I just thought, well, there's nothing I won't try. So it's you mentioned Wayne Gretzky, and Wayne Gretzky once said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I thought, I'm going to take a shot and go straight to the most famous autistic person literally on the planet. So you can't contact Temple Grandin. You can go to her website, and there's a little box where you can leave a question for Dr. Grandin. And I thought, well, I better just tell the truth. So I left a little message that I had a book coming out in September, that her writings and our seeing her were pivotal and paradigm shifting for me and for Ray. And I was hoping for an endorsement, and I hit send, and I felt a little abashed, and then I forgot all about it. And then she called me on the phone from Colorado. I remember seeing on my call display Colorado, and when I see a state, it's usually a telemarketer. And instead it was, hello, this is Temple Grandin. And my head nearly fell off. I couldn't speak for a few minutes. And she was very interested in Ray. She's interested in autistic adults, people like Ray who have not been diagnosed. So she asked questions about him. She wanted to see pictures of things he had done, some of his inventions. So we obliged her. And then she zeroed in on my book project. And she said, you know, there's a lot of books out there, Claire, about autism. So how's yours different? What's your hook? What's your angle? And that was a question I knew the answer to, because it's the question you have to ask when you pitch a manuscript to a publisher. Why should we publish this book? How is it different than what's already out there? Mm-hmm. Why are you the person to write this book? Why should we be interested? So I was able to explain to Dr. Grandin that, yes, I know there's a lot of books out there. I try to keep up with them, especially her books. And there are books by autistic people. There are books about autistic people. But as far as I know, my book is the only one that is based on a dialogue between an autistic person and a neurotypical. And she said, well, that's the kind of project I'd be interested in. And she asked me to send her my manuscript. And she wrote me a blurb.
Well, it's a remarkable story, and I know there's a little bit more to it that people can probe you on at a different time when you're meeting up with them, or in different ways. But I will say that I will reinforce the notion that some of the insights you share, and because you're in that remarkable dialogue with Ray, that transports me as a reader and an educator, especially to the edge of that bubble where I'm questioning my own beliefs about my own trainings and also learning a lot. And so for that, I'm very grateful for those insights, and I know that many people will value your book in that way as well. It helps us deepen our understandings, our insights about um, what's really going on. What are the sensibilities of people, and what are their experiences like? Because Ray shares
Exactly.
so many experiences, so many poignant experiences through you,
Yes.
and thus to my own, altering my own sensibilities. And so that makes it a profound book, profoundly different than what an era we're emerging from, where we thought we knew everything. We thought the
Yeah.
experts knew everything.
Hey, I thought when I finished reading all these books that I had cracked the code of Ray. I had figured out the puzzle. I had lined Ray up against the symptom checklist, and I could check enough boxes
Mm-hmm.
that he met the criteria for Asperger's syndrome, as it was then called. And thank goodness I didn't get a publishing contract when I thought I was finished writing, because that wasn't the story. The story was actually just beginning once we had got that sort of thing out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, what an interesting insight to share. Challenging orthodoxy is one of the themes. I would suggest a strong theme that emerges from not only your perspective but also Ray's and Ray's experiences of living his life, and so that those are really important insights for me and for others, I'm sure. Claire, we've reached that point where I said, "Hey, I would help to tee you up to read some excerpts from the book." I'm sure people would really value a few more excerpts. So
Yes.
over to you.
Okay, I just have one very short reading from the book. It's from a chapter called My Soul Would Speak, and I don't think it needs any context. In 2001, our cousin Dawn was hospitalized with a bone-crushing depression. Ray reached out to him by email as soon as he heard. Dawn responded, ever so politely at first, but as his exchanges with Ray continued, he began confessing some of his private agony, his feelings of worthlessness, and his fears that he would never be himself again. Dawn had been careful to end his letters on a brave, upbeat note, lest he burden Ray with his pain. That sort of concern for others was typical of the man and did not surprise me. But Ray did. His messages were kind, insightful, encouraging, even funny in just the right places, and laden with empathy. Here's an excerpt from one email. So this is Ray writing to our cousin. It's the strangest thing, Dawn. When I read your letters, I get the most incredibly powerful feeling of connection with you. I've been working on this email for a couple of weeks now. I'm no sentimental weakling, but I have to stop because I start crying. Feeling something of your pain has been a privilege for me, not a burden. And yet, it has been a burden, but one that I wouldn't put down for anything. There are pains that are to be embraced, not avoided, and this for me is one of those. It was difficult to reconcile the writer of these words with the Ray who so often seemed to need help extracting his foot from his mouth. How was this level of empathy and eloquence possible coming from someone who didn't even like looking people in the eye and who was usually guilty of insulting them in person? The incongruity of it bothered me. The insolence, the awkwardness, the unintended slights. These problems that bedeviled Ray in real time never seemed to happen in his writing. Given time and space to formulate a reply, he could hear perfectly, and his responses were pitch perfect. In writing, Ray could speak in the language of his heart with no risk of tripping over his own tongue. So I realized that Ray had actually done this many times, written with elegance and passion. And I told him so in an email, and this is his reply. Well, thanks. I strive for clarity and hit send only when I have achieved it. The problem only arises when I speak. It most often seems like it's someone else speaking. The inner man, the silent man, does not like most of what he hears. The speaking man is often rude, sardonic, and has an irritating voice and manner, and I'm always disappointed with what he says. No, I don't like him at all. Well, you truly are an enigma, Ray, I wrote back. You seem to be an entirely different person when you write. That, as it turns out, was an invitation, Ray's cue. It's true, he said. My mind lives in the nonverbal half of my head. Words for me are hollow and inadequate, phantoms of the living reality of thought and emotion. Except for poetry, of course, which transcends the limits of normal language. Writing is just a shadow, but the only way I can communicate is in the one-dimensional world of text. Sad, isn't it? It's so limited, so puny, but it's the only thing I've mastered. My soul would speak with better tools if it knew how. Ray had dared to be vulnerable. I couldn't risk scaring him away with a volley of intrusive questions about this speaking man, but from that moment on, I knew that if I wanted to access to my brother's heart and soul, I would have to bypass the speaking man altogether. I would communicate directly with the writing man. That's all I'm going to read.
Thank you for that. That's a remarkable sharing and passage.
Thanks, Michael.
And, you know, I don't say this frivolously, but for me, there's almost a sacred quality to what you are helping reveal in your book, Claire. And I'm very moved and very appreciative to have the opportunity to have read this myself. We're going to wrap up our questions in a moment here and move to perhaps field a few from the audience. But I wonder if there's one particular aspect of your book that, or one characteristic of it that you would really like people to take away.
Yeah. I hope my readers take away from reading it a little of what I took away from writing it. I am learning that I need to have a lot more compassion for anybody who is other. And I'm not just talking about autistic people. There are a lot of people who feel marginalized, or as Ray said, don't fit through the round hole quite as easily as I do. It's a more difficult world for them. But just because we can't get in their heads and we can't, like Ray said, you got to understand that you can't understand what it's like for me. But that doesn't excuse us from trying. So I read all these books. I thought I had it figured out. I did not have it figured out. So I think Temple Grandin said it best when she said, the world needs all kinds of minds. And it's a shame when minds as fine as my brother's are dismissed because of slight differences in neurotype.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very, very, very true. And I think that's, what you've just revealed as an aspect of your writing is so important for us to consider and put into motion, to bring into reality. So thanks for answering my questions, Claire. And in this really interesting conversation, let's extend it by seeking a few questions from the audience. And I've pulled up their questions right now.
Michael, can I tell you one more thing before we get to the questions?
Yeah.
Just thinking about the response I've got to the book so far. Every day good things have happened for me and Ray since September 12th when the book came out. People are asking me, like, Ray is a math tutor and an amateur astronomer, handyman, and I believe you went out and did a sky session with Ray this summer in your boat.
Just about a month ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people are asking, well, can Ray teach me astronomy too? My copy editor said, oh, I accidentally ran over my kid's bike. Do you think Ray can fix it? He's had a few requests through me of possible tutoring jobs. We've heard from autistic people who are saying, yes, this book gets me. But really, the person that astounded me most was Mum, our mum, the mother of Ray, and then me, and then 4 other kids. So I gave her a copy of the book, and she read it in 2 days. And she phoned me, and she said, well, I've read your book. And I wasn't quite sure what was coming, and I asked her what she thought of it. And her voice shook, and she was having trouble quite articulating the words because Ray is, what is he, 64 or 65? And she said, he's my own son, but I just see him through such different eyes now. And I couldn't ask for any more than that.
Different eyes now.
Now.
After reading your book.
Yeah, about her own son, written by her own daughter.
Yeah, it's a profound statement in itself from your mother. So you've done a remarkable feat with this book, Claire, and that's why I think I personally would encourage people to buy a copy for an educator or parent of some who may have a family member. And there's some stress and strain around a person's sensibilities or identities. And it's just so important for us to, as you've said, to reconcile our own evaluation and judgments of people that are merely a little different.
Yes.
Because genius takes many, many forms. It was somebody's idea 100 years ago that geniuses were, had straight A's in a standardized education program, and guess what? We've largely, rolled that rock down the hill since then.
I think we did. I think Einstein didn't do very well in school either, but his peculiarities and quirks were tolerated, and hence E equals MC squared.
So Ray tells me.
So he tells us.
All right, Claire,
okay.
Let's have a quick look at some of these questions.
Sure.
And, one with 5 votes. Do you have a favorite part or chapter of your book? And would you recommend that as a favorite part to write or to read?
Well, since about half my book has been heaved out, all of it's my favorite. But I think that's a really good question, and it's quite an easy one to answer because the chapter is called The Nephew Project. By this time, I knew I was writing a book, and Ray and I had some nephews who were struggling very badly in school, and I asked for Ray's help to get them up to speed in math. They'd kind of given up on the whole idea of passing their grades. So Ray ended up coming to my house in exchange for free food, which he will never turn down. He said he would tutor these kids. So like I say, I already knew where I was going. I was writing a book. So I had a notepad. And while these kids were sitting at my kitchen table, I was taking notes. So I was able to get that chapter down cold. And I saw Ray take these kids from what they themselves would term as hopeless cases to actually, one of them passed his math final with 80% and started asking questions about math just for the joy of it. And I was standing there in my kitchen when that happened. And I love that chapter, and educators love that chapter, because here we have Ray in an arena where it's not just social banter, which terrifies him. He'll probably say something wrong. But here he knows what he's doing. He knows the subject. He can teach it. He's in a safe space, and boy, can he teach. He could teach my glasses how to do math. So I love that chapter. That's my answer.
That's that just spawned, I liked all of the book myself, and I started rereading it again this week, and I found myself laughing and crying in various places, just with the poignancy of some of the anecdotes, like the one you've shared, and remember Ray. I observed him closely when he was tutoring, and I got a sense of a very, very caring sensibility.
Yes.
What can you? This is teeing off another question that I saw was, what has Ray's response been to the book as well, Clarence? I'm sure that's been an important consideration of yours all along. I was there when you handed him a book, as well as when you handed it to me. Did Ray read the book? What's his feedback been to you?
Ray read the book, and that was the first time Ray read the book. My publisher said, first of all, has Ray read this manuscript? And I said, no, he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to interfere. He doesn't want to get into arguments with me about details. He says, it's your book. You write me the way you want. He even wrote a hilarious waiver to Caitlin Press saying, I'm not going to sue anybody. Babs can say anything she wants. I'm Babs to Ray. So once that was out of the way, I wrote, and Ray continued to answer my questions, every question with absolute eloquence. He was articulate. He's funny. He's sad. I could get to the truth of questions I'd always had about eye contact, about empathy, about these mistakes that he's made more than once. And so all of this transpired, and he's like, no, I will read it when you hand it to me as a finished published book. And so with you sitting in my backyard not too long ago in September, I got to do that. And Ray read it very quickly. He said, I'm going to read this very slowly, and he read it very quickly. He told me that there were places where he cried, because seeing your life in the third person and from a distance of time, and there were things that he could see more clearly, things where he had caused hurt or been hurt. So it wasn't without pain for him reading the book, but everybody says Ray's walking a little taller these days. And I think he told me at one point that when I said, Ray, I think we're writing a book, he said, well, that's good, because I think it might be writing man's last hope of a voice. And I think it is a voice for Ray, and it's the voice that Ray wanted heard.
Very interesting. Your book is also a remarkable testament to your caring nature for your brother. And there are so many instances throughout your story, the narrative that tells your life story, really, of being in a very tight relationship with Ray and caring for him. I was really, really deeply moved by one of the stories you related about how you helped Ray. I guess you revealed to Ray, or helped Ray experiment nutritionally, and it had a profound impact on his own, his own behavior, his own physiology. Can you share a little bit about that?
I will share a little bit, and stop me when I've shared enough, because I could talk on this subject for a long time.
Well, it's an important one, because we often, I believe, in the orthodoxy, we have disconnected some aspects of lifestyle, including nutritional intake, i.e. what we eat and drink, to the result. how we are in the world. So
Yes.
over to
And
you.
of course, now we know that we can't split our brain from our body. Ray told me at one point, he says, I have no empathy for this thing. He had horrible heartburn, digestive issues, but he didn't care because those things were not his, that's not where Ray lives. He lives in this nonverbal half of his head. He didn't really care. He didn't give it much of a shot. He wasn't an idiot. He eats healthy things when put in front of him. However, when Ray was tutoring our nephews, I started making yogurt and feeding it to Ray. And he started making eye contact with me. I remember the day Ray said, "Thanks for lunch. That was good," and took his plate to the counter, which was a new behavior for him. As Ray takes better care of his nutrition, I think his brain and the rest of the ecology of Ray has started to integrate more. So yeah, you can't, like you talk, Michael, in your research about the learning ecology, and a kid who's living on chicken sticks and goldfish crackers can't learn to their potential. They can't. It's all one thing. And yeah, Ray and I have explored that. He can still be an idiot at times, I have to say. But the better he eats, the better Ray he is.
Um, Thank you. I hope we've whet people's appetite with that very the very slenderest part of that anecdote, because it's an important part of your story, Claire. Here's another question. I'd love for you to comment about what you've learned about the prevalence of differentness in even our little community. So you've helped to reveal a great deal in your story about difference and how you came to discern that. I imagine that's had an impact on how you perceive all personalities in our community. And what would you have to say about that?
Our community is full of people of different neurotypes. The number of people who've reached out to me since the book came out, who say, "This is me, I'm here, this is me," probably not different enough in some cases to receive a diagnosis. And when Ray and I were growing up, of course, there was no diagnosis. I didn't hear of Asperger's syndrome till Ray and I were in our 40s. So I know many people in this community who I think this social world is really hard on them, and a lot of people who are socially anxious, depressed, withdrawn, might be somewhere on the spectrum. Not that I would be quick to diagnose anyone. I have no credentials in that regard. But yeah, there are so, I am stopped everywhere I go by somebody saying, "Claire, my brother, my uncle, my son, my grandson." I went to an actual book group of real humans in a room the other day. It was my first reading to a book club. And of the six of us sitting in our carefully distanced spots, there was no one who didn't have someone who was either struggling with mental health issues, on the spectrum, suspected to be on the spectrum, worried about the label if they were to go and be diagnosed. It was a clean sweep. It was all six of us. And these people were only picked because they like books, not because they're interested in autism.
Well, I would say that one of the inspirations or the gifts of your book for me was at this very time when our communities, our societies worldwide are suffering this incredible stress and challenge at this time.
Yes.
That stress is a forcer. It's a determinant of all kinds of behaviors and characteristics for all kinds of people, and it just causes me to slow down
Yes.
and observe and find that that empathetic place in me to place of kindness to reach out rather
I've got
than
to
to rush
tell
to
you,
judgment.
yes, me too. I've got to tell you that an autistic friend of mine, he's a dad, was diagnosed later in life only because his child was diagnosed. And he said, I know it's me. I'm the genetic source material of this. So he got a diagnosis. And he said, it's kind of one of the few aspects of this pandemic that's working for him, because he said, finally, my social awkwardness and my lack of, desire for tactile contact can be explained away by rules and regulations around COVID and distance. And he said this stuff that his wife complains about screens and the sound being a little off and the eye contact being a little off. He says, my world is way more complicated. So this flattens the interface for him and makes it more controllable. So we joked that if COVID hadn't come, maybe a cabal of autistic people might have invented it just to keep the world at bay a little bit and more manageable.
Keep us on our toes for sure. Look, I'm looking at the time and seeing we're getting close to an hour, and that's basically where we said. But
yes.
I'll ask you one last question then. That has come through our question feed, rearranging it only, tweaking it a little. What would you say to the Claire who started this book 7 years ago? If you could go back now, knowing what you know, and recollecting what you were thinking when you started the project, what are some of the what's some of the guidance or advice you might have to share with that Claire?
I wrote for so many years thinking I was the world's biggest fool. I did not, no publisher was asking me for this book. My husband always believed it was going to be a book. I didn't, but I was compelled to write. Like I said, I had this gold mine of correspondence. It seemed important. I think if you feel compelled to tell your story, you got to tell it. And I have so many friends that that knew it was important and knew it was a story. They're all out there through the little hole in my computer, even that one that really needs to go to bed because it's 3 a.m.
Where is she again?
She's in Cardiff, Wales. So people who have a story, the writer Richard Wagamese said, all we are is story. It is what we came here with. It is all that we leave behind. So tell your story, believe in it, cozy up to the right people who will encourage you along the way. And maybe you will do a little bit of good in the world. And I am the luckiest person on the planet right now.
Well, I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to read your book, Claire, and interview you about it, to ask you some questions, and to listen to your very careful and sensitive answers as well. So thank you for that opportunity. And I guess I get the chance to hold the book up too. The book is Dispatches from Ray's Planet. There you go. There's a triumvirate,
a triumvirate
of books here. So it's been my pleasure, and I'll leave it at that for myself, and over to Monica and over to you, Claire. Thank you. And
thank you, Michael. And Monica's going to be so happy when I'm not torturing her with tech questions anymore. Thank you very much, Monica.
I'm happy to help. Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you so much, Michael. Claire, do you have any final thank yous before I sign everyone off?
I love my friends and family, and I love Caitlin Press for making this possible for me. And I love Michael Macer. Just thanks to every single person that managed to get through on this crowdcast. And thanks again, Monica. I promise never to ask you another tech question in my life.
Not a promise you're going to keep, but I'm happy
Maybe
to help. That's what I'm here for. So thank you very much to you, Claire. Thank you to Michael as well. I just want to remind everyone to buy a copy of the book, Dispatches from Ray's Planet. We highly encourage you to support your local bookseller, or you can buy a copy for a friend, for a family member. Christmas is coming up, Hanukkah. It makes a great gift. And we just want to thank everyone for showing up. If you're watching this after the fact, thank you for taking some time with us. We hope you learned something. We hope you had a laugh, had a cry, and thank you again. So I'm going to sign us off. Take care, everyone.